Um,
Hello.
okay, coming back to what I was talking about. What was
Mm-hmm.
I talking about? Yeah, condenser microphones and dynamic microphones. Now let's talk about ribbon microphones. Let's start with the obvious. I don't have one. Um, the second part is how do these microphones work? So okay, let's assume that this is like a ribbon microphone. Okay, this is not, but let's assume for this to be one. Okay, so what they do is like they're built like a dynamic microphone. Okay, all right, so it will also have a capsule, right? And it will also have like an electromagnet behind it. The only difference is that it is that the electromagnet does not have a wire around it, right? So basically, there's like a ribbon, okay, and there's like this little ribbon that is suspended with a magnetic flux, okay. So there's still electromagnetic induction happening, but it is happening through a ribbon and not a wire, okay. So what that does is it gives like a very warm sort of a sound because it's like really like a thin piece of ribbon, right? Now the only problem of that being there is that because it's a ribbon, it's very sensitive. So that means if I do bam to a ribbon microphone, it's gone forever. Because if the ribbon like is not suspended by the electromagnet anymore, it's gone. RIP. Right. But the thing is that because it's a ribbon, it's not a wire, so the vibration is not consistent. Again, so it does need something to power it. Again, our friend phantom power comes into play. So ribbon microphones, although they are dynamic, need phantom power. That being said, if studio and you do find a ribbon microphone, please Google it. Google whether it requires phantom power or not, because you might just blow it up. Because the problem is that people have started developing newer technology where ribbon microphones are coming into the market that don't need phantom power. Okay, so yeah, um, that being said, that's all the kinds of microphones you're going to get. All right, also a little side note about microphones: don't go too crazy buying them. All right, every studio has one, and if you're going to go and record in the studio, you'll obviously have those microphones. If you're not going to record in the studio and you want it at home, a good idea would be to just get a dynamic microphone and a condenser and you do. Okay, so that about I spoke about two things: amplitude and frequency. And just so we are clear, frequency is going to be the pitches that we're going to see. Okay, so before I get into any further mumbo jumbo about sounding, basically frequency just means that how many times an object vibrate per second, right? So if we all guitar players here, so we know that that the A string on the on the fifth string A is supposed to vibrate at 440 hertz. That means 440 per second. So the amount of time you vibrate in a second is going to determine what note you are, and all these frequencies or pitches that we have are sort of notes, right? And those notes are frequency, which are vibrations per second. So when I said frequency, that means whatever note I'm singing is going to be the frequency. Amplitude is the perceived loudness, or that means how much information is within that frequency or how loud it is. All right. So if I'm going to sing like really loud, it's going to have bigger amplitude than if I'm going to sing it softer. Does that make sense? So those are the two parameters that affect the sound that's going to go into any microphone. All right. Now let's talk about polar patterns. All right. So let me bring back all my microphones. Polar patterns. All right. So now all of these are like a cardioid pattern. All right. So one second. Does ribbon microphone affect the quality? Oh, definitely. Ribbon microphones are like really warm sounding, and you have like these old tube microphones. They're like nice and warm and add like that sort of silky warmth to your music. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm just using adjectives, but and I don't have any. Unfortunately, I have never recorded with a ribbon microphone, and I did have an opportunity once, but I was like, I had to like, if I had to record with that, I had to walk up to Studio C to get it, and I was very lazy, so I was like, man, just let it be. So I've never recorded with one. So I wish I could play you some examples here, but I'll play you other examples of stuff that I've recorded with these microphones. And also like that, I did like successful recordings with these microphones. Just goes on to show you don't need ribbon microphones. If you don't believe me, you can check out all the Grammys that I've won from things. So anyway, coming back to polar patterns. So polar patterns is what we also call directional response. Directional response is something that you're not supposed to say in front of audio engineers, because then they won't talk to you anymore because they won't know what it is. But then when you say polar pattern, they're going to be like, oh, you're talking about polar patterns. So yeah, it's kind of like that. Okay. Polar patterns or directional response basically means the sensitivity of a microphone at various angles of incidence. That basically means that this instrument has a range. This microphone has a range where it's going to pick up stuff from. Similarly, this also has a range, and this has a range, and that range varies. All right. So if somebody puts a mic like this and I'm singing like this, it's not going to work. Okay. If somebody's put the microphone like this and I'm singing like this, it's not going to work. All right. I mean, you're still going to get some sound because it's a condenser microphone, but with this, imagine somebody puts this mic like this and you're singing like that. I mean, nothing's going to happen. Okay. So a frequency, like the directional response of all of these microphones that I have here are varied, right? But they're basically three types of frequency response. One is a cardioid polar pattern. Okay. One is a bidirectional, or I like to call it the bipolar pattern. And the third one is omnidirectional. All right. So these are the three kinds of polar patterns that you're going to find. So when I say a cardioid, I mean the mathematical shape of a cardioid, right? I don't know if you guys are into complex mathematics, but if you've ever messed around with Mandelbrot's equations and stuff like that, cardioids are all over the place, right? So a card basically looks like a heart, right? It's not exactly a heart. It does not look like a heart, but like the heart that we send to our lovers, that kind of heart, that one. It kind of looks like that, but it's like more rounder, okay? And it's got like, so that is what a cardioid looks like. Okay. So if a microphone's frequency response is of a cardioid, so this is the frequency response. So we can see that behind that, you don't get any sound down here, right? A kind of a fat heart. Yeah. Yeah. So if you stand here, you're not going to get any, but if you stand here, all of this is going to get picked up. Everything that's going to happen around this area. Okay, so that's what a cardioid is, right? Now there are different kinds of cardioids, but we're going to get into that in a bit. I'm going to share my screen so that I can show you all of this visually. But there's also bidirectional, which we call figure eight. So that's basically two cardioids put one behind the other. So you got this and this like that. So it's like that, like a figure of eight, right? And then there's omnidirectional, which is like omnidirectional. Being said, those are your polar patterns. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see it better and you don't just see like these random shapes that I'm making with my hands. Okay. All right. See my screen? Can you guys see my screen? Which one? Can you see the Zoom one or can you see the PDF?
We can see the PDF.
PDF is visible.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay. Okay, is there any specific range we have to follow every time when we do vocals? Yeah, I mean, see, recording vocals is like a whole other ball game, man. Like, I mean, we could talk about that today, but definitely, I mean, just hit me up later. I'll talk to you about vocals. I mean, more important than recording vocals is how to deal with vocalists, and that is like a whole other uh, thing that I've spoken about a lot in the past. But coming back to directional responses, so yeah, we have a cardioid, a supercardioid, so cardioid, bidirectional, and omnidirectional. All right. There's also supercardioid and hypercardioid, which we're going to look at later. But this is what a cardioid looks like. You see these little hearts here? Zoom in. Okay. Is this good enough? So you see like these little fat hearts. This is what a cardioid looks like. Okay. There you go. All right. So now we're going to talk about like how to mic. Okay. So this is like the first stereo miking technique that, I mean, this is not the most intuitive one, but like I want to talk about it in the beginning because I don't know, it was the most intuitive to me when I was starting out. But this is what we call an XY technique, okay? So XY technique is basically two microphones like this, right? So you can set them up like this. You can even play dandiya with them. No, don't do that. But this is what it is, okay? Now these are two cardioids, all right? One's like this, the other's like that, right? And those cardioids are pointed towards the sound source, right? Now you see that when these cardioids are together, they form like a 90 degrees angle, right? They can form a wider angle, you know, it can go up to like about 130, but just make sure that you have a protractor and you measure 30 degrees. And so yeah, so the spread is pointed towards the source, okay? So the spread is going to be pointed towards the source. That means that it's not going to be like this, it's not going to be like this. So if I'm recording the camera right now, it's going to be like this. So this is where the source is going to be pointing towards. Does that make sense? Now the advantages of like this method, there are pros and cons of the style of recording. So now the pros of this one is that you can get a perfect mono, so that later if I need to like, you know, close this down into like just one microphone, I can do that. Okay, I can smash both the files together and make it one. Okay, it can be set with like very common and like easily available microphones, stereo bus, right? And capsules can be placed like this, or like it works both ways. Okay, this is important miking techniques, right? The cons are, you know, they're like that if sources are like slightly off center, like, you know, they would tend to mono out. What that basically means are that, you know, if you have like it like this or like that, then it won't mono out very well. Okay, so now the whole idea basically behind monoing is that, you know, the stereo sound is developed because there are two microphones and sound is reaching them at about the same time, correct? If I'm going to shift it like this, the sound is going to reach this one first and this one later. Does that make sense? So when I do that, that creates like a four stereo. And when you're going to sum it down into mono, it's not going to like translate as well as it translates for this. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions about XY miking? Okay, great. Bloom line kind of looks like XY. It can also be done like this.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead. What's up?
yeah, so like this type of miking is only used in guitars.
No, I mean, right now I'm not even talking about guitars. I'm just talking about mics and miking in general. We're going to take all the information that we learned about the guitar and the information that we're going to learn about mics and miking, and then we're going to apply it to the guitar.